I don't like it.
Turning down my phone because it just went off. All right, I have started the recording. This is Catherine Calloway with the Red Cross Disaster in Kentucky. And this is the monthly volunteer engagement call. It is a training call for our local volunteer engagement leads in their chapters. And the DPNs and DPSs are invited to it as well because it is information that is good for all. So we've got Kathy Hayes on Skype, and we've got Ari on the phone. And did anyone else join us? All right, we will get started. So today I was going to use as just an opportunity to sort of reset what the purpose of the call is and to talk about the volunteer engagement team and the way that it is structured and the responsibilities that it has. So it's very possible this could be a nice short call since Kathy and Ari do engagement all the time, but it also might be an opportunity for us to simply have some question and answer. So I've started by sharing on Skype the YouTube channel for Kentucky Red Cross Disaster Cycle Services. This is mine, so it's engagement in particular, but it is also called something sort of generic. So if we needed it for other purposes, it is available. But I have been uploading, I've been recording our videos for several months. Our video conversations for several months, and I've been uploading them here. It was my intention to start with a what is volunteer engagement in Red Cross disaster in Kentucky, and sort of move in a linear way so that we were building on skills over time. But in the middle of this, trying to build skills over time, we've had several opportunities to stand up an operation here at home or to deploy workers outside of Kentucky to a larger disaster. So I've used our monthly calls then to talk more about those skills. So hopefully this will get us a little bit better back on track. But it also, I think, could give us just some information so that we are better able to represent what volunteer engagement is in disaster cycle services in Kentucky. So are there any questions before we get started?
Yes. Where do we find these?
Sorry, I heard you say yes, Kathy, but then I'm afraid I talked over you when you asked.
Where do we find these
videos?
Videos that you made, yes.
So this is all under Kentucky Disaster Workforce on YouTube, and the link for the videos are included in the calendar item that invited you to the call today.
Okay.
Yeah. So it should be a link. I hope. That's where it's supposed to be. There should be a link in that calendar item that I will pull up right now and just make sure that I'm telling the truth. Coming up. Been thinking about it.
There is a link at the YouTube channel.
Yeah, there it is.
There you go.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay.
Thank you, Linda. All right, good. Okay, so I've got the position description. These are for the local engagement leads. So at the regional level, there is...
You want the phone up there?
There's myself at the regional level. And then I should be working with a team of 7 regional engagement leads that are they're specific. They are specialized. There is a training lead and a volunteer recognition and appreciation lead. There's an onboarding and engagement lead. There's a leadership development lead. There's a volunteer connection lead, a deployment lead, and I'm afraid I did not think to pull up this org chart so that you could see those. And a few of them are currently filled. We've got Beth Dlutowski, who works as the volunteer engagement lead, and she works in mostly an advisory capacity to me. We meet regularly, and she gives good ideas and good feedback, etc. We also have Victoria Cooper is the recognition and appreciation lead for the regional team, and Esther Jafar is the volunteer connection lead for the team. Again, they're mostly advisory in nature, not really doers. Esther does some behind the scenes volunteer engagement, sort of, she does some data entry kind of cleanup. So we really have, through trying this engagement process several different ways, have really settled on the engagement needs to happen at the chapter level, in the territories where the work is being done, because those engagement team members will be the most knowledgeable, not only about what volunteers, disaster volunteers are doing and need to do, but about the community itself, where we can get involved. So this position description was put together so that we could be specific about how we wanted our local engagement leads to work in the chapters. These folks have a solid reporting line to the DPM. So the DPM is really giving the direction for the local engagement lead in the chapter, and then a dotted line to me and the rest of the team at the regional level, so that we can act as subject matter experts, so that we can provide training and resources and assistance and support, so that we can give direction and some shape to what engagement looks like in Kentucky. So it begins at the top with a description of the volunteer, the disaster workforce engagement team. We really think of them as a volunteer team that welcomes and counsels our new volunteers as they are referred to disaster cycle services. Really works closely with our volunteers their first several weeks volunteering with us, and guides them in several different directions based on interest, skills, ability, availability. So that is its primary focus, is to take the new volunteer by the hand and lead them through the first several weeks into several months of their involvement in disaster cycle services. Also, however, we think that these folks are uniquely positioned to know so many of the volunteers that during times of a local disaster, floods, storms, power outages, etc., that local engagement lead is invaluable to the DPM, who frequently becomes a job director on a smaller operation that is chapter focused, chapter contained, or to, if it's simply standing up one shelter, two shelters, then that person becomes invaluable to the shelter manager, who's trying to do the call down of the available volunteers and get them in there. So that's number two. So since you know the volunteers so well, we really rely on you to help us get them activated and ready to respond to a disaster. And then lastly, since again you know the volunteers and you know what interests they have, then to get them ready to deploy outside of Kentucky, or really even from one side of Kentucky to the other, because that is also a deployment. So any new volunteer coming into a new role is interested in, well, what kind of time commitment does this mean for me? So I sort of boiled this down to what I think it is. And to me, a local engagement lead is available to check email at least once a day. A couple of times a day would be ideal for me, first thing in the morning, last thing at night, just to keep their pulse on what's going on in the community, in the chapter. Should be able to contact new volunteers a couple of times a week. For one thing, we want to vary the times that we are calling brand new volunteers. We might call them at noon on Tuesday because some of them don't work, or maybe they can talk to us on their lunch hour. We want to call them at 6 p.m. on Thursday because for those who do work, that's a better time for them. Maybe once over the weekend, so people who had a commitment those other times can be caught. But we want to get in touch with a brand new volunteer within the first 7 days that they're referred to us. So trying to vary the times of days and the days that we're calling our folks. So that's what this time commitment is trying to show, is if you can check email a couple of times a day, there might not be anything going on. But we want you also to be able to contact the new volunteers. And I never spend more than 20-30 minutes on the phone with a new volunteer the first time I speak with them. So if you're calling 4 or 5 volunteers at that time, that's going to be an hour max, maybe in a week, maybe a couple of hours. So the same thing, so it's leading on to this conference call is an hour per month. I want you at the monthly volunteer meetings in your chapter so that you're representing volunteerism with Disaster Cycle Services there, and so that you are meeting any engaged volunteers to help lead them to any additional opportunities. Then in the event that there is a disaster, those times might get ramped up. During a disaster in the chapter, if you are going to be doing the volunteer call down, pulling a list out of Volunteer Connection of everyone who is available to respond and are appropriately trained to open a shelter or do some feeding or do some DA or some casework, and making those phone calls. I do this regularly, and I could say I can do 20 phone calls in half an hour. So you can call several dozen people in an hour, hour and a half, and get their availability to respond to a disaster. And it's a very similar process if we have a larger disaster going on outside of Kentucky. If we're going to respond to a larger hurricane, etc., that you would be doing exactly the same thing, calling down the list of certified and qualified volunteers to get them ready to deploy to a disaster, and you would get them assigned to that disaster and ready to travel. So those are the time commitments as I see them. Again, how is the reporting structure? The disaster program manager has the direct line to the DWET, those local engagement leads, with myself being the subject matter expert that provides the direction, information, resources, training, etc., to make you feel fully equipped to do that role. There are a number of required trainings. Our most basic trainings, Disaster Cycle Services and Overview, since you are representing disaster to our new volunteers, should be well versed in it. Deployment fundamentals and con ops basics, because you should have a working knowledge of what it's like to be deployed and be able to communicate that, share that, make people feel comfortable on their first trips out on deployment. Being behind the scenes in Volunteer Connection and in EDGE, so there are several courses here for preparing to be an admin, Volunteer Connection, and EDGE. And be available and well-versed and comfortable giving a job induction or talking about individual development plans with our volunteers. So as new volunteers arrive, we want to get them inducted into their first activity, into their next position, into their first gap. So we want to be able to describe those, explain those, give a good summary of those. And then set them on a path of development. If they are coming in and they've decided to try their hand at DAT, making sure that they get to go and shadow a DAT run, that they get to go and be a second or a third DAT responder, and see if they like that, if that's what they want to continue to do. Then changing their position to a DAT trainee and getting the training ready for them, following them through that training to make sure that they're developing into a DAT service associate, a DAT supervisor, a DAT manager, if that's the trajectory that they're going to follow. And then, because we're going to be helping do some staffing roles on a disaster, to getting the Volunteer Connection disaster management training. I have, again, these folks are listed, our regional team members with Vicki Cooper, Beth Zutowski, and Esther Jafar in their roles. And then we've got our local engagement. We have these, some of them have been filled in. There are multiple volunteers in one location, in one chapter, filling some of these roles. Some of them are specialized in just doing welcome to the new volunteers. Some of them are doing just an orientation, just the job induction, just the preparing them to for a gap and to deploy. Or they might be sharing that. Maybe they're doing it every Tuesday is Kathy's shift, and she takes every new volunteer who shows up on Tuesday. And every Wednesday is Bob's day, and Bob welcomes every volunteer who comes in on Wednesday. So again, it's describing what we do during the blue skies, doing the steady state. The new volunteer comes in, and we would like for them to have one point of contact so they know who their person is to lead them through and to answer their questions. So we've got the one point of contact as our local engagement lead. They maintain and manage all of the tasks in Volunteer Connection that go with bringing on a new volunteer. Excuse me, I have to take a drink. Specifically receiving them through the opportunity queue and approving or rejecting a new volunteer. Maintaining their appropriate position. If they are achieving a gap, updating that information. And maintaining the documentation that you are in contact with a volunteer. That goes in the activities section on the Volunteer Connection, and giving them hours as appropriate. If you're meeting with a volunteer and it's brand new, excuse me, I'm going to have a coughing fit. Then you're giving them hours until you've taught them how to do their own hours in Volunteer Connection. You are going to be developing individual development plans. These are new. So right now the DPMs and DPSs are getting ready to be doing these with our volunteers, and hopefully then the local engagement leads will be taking these on very soon. Talking about what activities there are, what folks want to get involved in, what training is involved in doing that, what experience. If they want to become a leader in an activity, making sure they have the opportunity for a mentor, making sure they have an opportunity to deploy locally, nationally, so that they can develop those skills. So setting that to paper so that they are on an individual development plan. That individual development plan also feeds the training plan. So the local engagement lead can be speaking with the DPM and DPS about what trainings are needed to really move the new volunteers along their path so that they are developing. Help them to help to promote the trainings so that we can get more people involved in the proper, appropriate, relevant trainings for them, giving them a call the week before to make sure that they are aware that we're having a logistics training, and logistics trainings don't come around often, so please plan to be there if logistics is what you want to train into, etc. And then helping to maintain EDGE so that we've got people getting the proper credit for their attendance at these training. All right, so it goes into also how to, when we have a larger event outside of the chapter is where this starts, is if you've got folks who want to deploy outside of the chapter, hopefully they have been on a DAT team and they've developed some skills and they've trained to be shelter worker, caseworker, feeding, etc., so that they feel ready to leave their chapter and try to do this on a larger scale. So when we are setting up a DRO, a disaster relief operation, even on the regional or Kentucky level, or the division, which is our 5-state level, or nationally, then they will be deployed out and making sure that they feel ready, competent to do so, that they have the proper gaps and everything on file that they need, like a driver's license, a health status record, a motor vehicle records check, that they speak with the nurse if they need to before they get deployed. At this time, our local engagement leads will help monitor the open staffing requests on Volunteer Connection on the door. They will be in contact with our volunteers who are available and interested in going, and we'll get them assigned and ready to walk out the door with their mission cards and get on a plane. Like I said, this applies for regional, so Kentucky-wide. So if you're going to deploy from one side of Kentucky to the other, the same process applies. You get into the door, you open it up, they open requests, you assign your worker, and the reason we want to make sure that they're deployed on a regional level even is so that the folks at the other side on staffing know that they're coming, make sure they have a hotel room, if they need a rental car, etc. Then welcoming them back. We've got this here at the end. Welcome the responders back home. Give them an exit interview. We have a form for that. It's rather yes or no questions, and I wish it were more of a conversation. So Since you will be the point of contact for the new volunteer who's just gone on his first deployment, you would have more of a relationship to be able to have that conversation about how did it go? Do you feel like you met your goals for this trip? Was anything challenging or overwhelming? Do we need to talk more about this? Maybe they need to speak with somebody in mental health or in spiritual care to feel more comfortable about coming home and re-entering the real world. And then making sure that they know what to do with their mission card when they get home and how to update their availability so they can go out again. So that's the anything that is larger than the chapter. And again, in the chapter, having these folks do your call down, pull the volunteer list out of Volunteer Connection of those who are equipped, ready, trained to do shelter work if that's what's needed, and give them a call and find out their availability before providing that information for someone else to schedule, whether that's the DPM or the job director or the shelter manager to do the scheduling. So that was quickly through the position description. And I want to say one more time that we have some chapters where there are multiple volunteers that have divided this up. They've taken pieces of it, so it's not one person trying to tackle the whole thing. I spoke with Northeast Ohio today, and that is the way that they have it done is by day. So somebody takes a day-long shift. They are the Tuesday DWET local engagement lead. They are the Wednesday, so they take any new volunteer that comes in on Wednesday. So that might be a way that would work as well. I'm going to stop talking now and see what questions or comments we've got from the group on the phone and on Skype.
Catherine?
Yes, ma'am.
I know I've got several, I'm going to say, jobs online as far as Volunteer Connection, but do I need WET as another gap on my list? So let's say on a certain day I'm doing those types of jobs, because right now I use that a lot. I'll say external relations. I think every time I'm in the office I use external relations because I'm reaching out to different agencies or answering phones or whatever else. So I need that, I guess.
Okay. And at one point not too long ago, Linda and I did talking about getting you I think it's called local engagement is the position. But I will pull it up in just a few minutes when I'm offline and double check and make sure you've got that added to your list. Any other questions or comments or clarification or things you that hoped that we would cover from the group on the phone or on Skype? All right. Well, this was really just, like I said, sort of to recenter us and restart us on a path of engagement and development. So I thought it was probably going to be a short call today. So I will go ahead and post this one on YouTube as we fit. And I'll talk to you again next month. All right.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you.
Bye.